The car rolled forward in silence. Scarlett Vaughn sat in the back seat, her eyes locked on a financial report that was falling apart in her hands. The numbers were collapsing, and so was she. Then the driver, a quiet man who had not spoken a word all morning, broke the silence. He pointed out a strategic flaw none of her advisors had caught. The car slowed. Scarlett lifted her head. A temporary driver had just solved what an entire team of experts could not. Who was this man, really? The Vaughn Capitol Tower rose 42 floors above downtown Manhattan, and on the top floor, Scarlett Vaughn had not slept in 31 hours. Her office was glass on 3 sides. The city looked small from up there, which was the point. She stood at the window with a cup of black coffee gone cold in her hand and watched the traffic below move in patterns that had stopped meaning anything to her 3 days ago. On her desk sat the Halberd acquisition file. $240 million committed, approved by her board, cleared by her analysts. And yet something in the margins of page 17 had been bothering her since Monday, a small discrepancy in the valuation model that nobody else seemed to notice. She had built her career on noticing, and at 35, she ran the largest woman-led investment firm on the East Coast. The industry had 3 words for her: cold, precise, unmovable. She preferred the third. Her assistant knocked once and entered without waiting. The regular driver had called in that morning with a family emergency, something about a brother in surgery, and would be out for an unknown length of time. The prognosis was uncertain. An agency was sending a replacement within the hour. The assistant had vetted him personally, clean record, 10 years of executive transport references from 2 Fortune 500 offices. She set a folder on the desk and left the name on the top line showing. Ethan Cole. Ethan Cole arrived at exactly 7:53 the next morning, 7 minutes early. He stood beside the black sedan in the underground garage, hands folded, wearing a dark suit that had been pressed but not tailored lately. When Scarlett walked out of the elevator with her assistant 1 step behind her, he opened the rear door without a word and closed it the moment she was inside. He offered no introduction. He asked no questions. The itinerary had been sent to him the night before. He was older than she had expected, mid-40s maybe, and there was something unhurried in the way he moved, the way a man moves when he has already made peace with whatever is coming. The car pulled into traffic. Scarlett opened the Halberd file across her lap and began reading for the 4th time that week. She did not notice the silence of the driver at first, because silence from staff was what she paid for. What she noticed eventually was that the silence felt different, attentive, almost listening. She was on the phone by the 2nd block. Her chief strategist, Marcus Renner, was on the line and losing patience with her for questioning the deal again. The leverage ratio on the 3rd subsidiary did not match the parent filing, she told him, and she had read it 4 times. Marcus said it matched their team had cleared it twice. She asked him to explain why the revenue recognition schedule assumed a market expansion that had not been signed. Marcus exhaled into the phone and told her that the signature was coming. That was the whole point. She ended the call without saying goodbye. The car was stopped at a red light on 57th. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds, and when she opened them, she found that Ethan was watching her in the rearview mirror, not staring, but glancing the way a man checks a gauge. "The assumption is the problem," he said. The light turned green. The car moved forward. Scarlett's head lifted from the folder, and she asked him in the flat voice she used with subordinates, who had overstepped, to repeat himself. He kept his eyes on the road and explained in the same unhurried tone that a revenue schedule built on an unsigned expansion was not a valuation, it was a forecast dressed as one. Whoever modeled the deal was betting that the ink arrived before the audit did. Scarlett said nothing for the length of a full block. She was not used to being spoken to by people whose names she had learned 90 minutes earlier. She was especially not used to being spoken to correctly. She asked him his name again, as if she had not already read it off the folder, and he told her it was Ethan Cole. She asked how long he had been a driver. Long enough, he answered. For the rest of the drive, she did not open the folder again. She watched the back of his head instead. He offered no further elaboration and made no attempt to sell her on his observation. He simply drove. The car pulled up to the Halbert offices at 9:10. Ethan stepped out, opened her door, and stood aside. As she passed him, she told him to wait. Inside the building, she sat through a 90-minute meeting with Halbert's executive team and heard almost none of it. She was thinking about the revenue recognition schedule, and she was thinking about the fact that Marcus Renner, who had worked with her for 6 years and drew an annual salary of $2.1 million, had not raised the concern a man in the front seat of her own car had raised in a single sentence. By the time she came back down to the garage, she had made 2 decisions. The first was that she would pull the Halbert file apart page by page that evening and find out whether Ethan Cole was right. The second was that if he was right, she needed to know who he actually was. He was waiting by the car exactly where she had left him and opened the door as she approached. She did not get in immediately. "Where did you learn to read a valuation model?" she asked him. He considered the question for the length of a breath before answering that he used to read a lot. "Habit," he said. She told him that was not an answer, and he agreed that it wasn't. She studied him. He was not nervous. He was not performing. He was not trying to impress her, which was in her experience the thing people did most reliably when they wanted something. Whatever Ethan Cole wanted, it was not her attention. She got into the car. The door closed. As the sedan eased up the ramp toward the street, she reached forward and slid open the partition between the front seat and the back, something she had not done once in 4 years of being driven. She told him to take the long way back. And while he drove, she said he would tell her what else was wrong with the deal. He drove her through 32 blocks of midtown traffic and in a calm voice that never lifted into lecture, walked her through 3 other weaknesses in the Halbert acquisition. A buried liability on the pension side, a currency exposure in the Brazilian subsidiary that had been hedged against the wrong index, a management earnout that vested on revenue rather than margin, which meant the acquired team would be incentivized to grow the top line, even if it burned the bottom one. Every point was one her own team should have caught. He was not guessing. He was reading the deal the way someone reads a book they have already read once before. When the car finally stopped in front of the tower, Scarlett did not move to get out. She sat for a moment with her hand on the door handle, the folder closed on her lap. She had a choice, and she knew she had it. She could thank him, walk away, and never speak to him again. He was a driver. His observations, however accurate, were outside the structure, outside the firm, outside every protocol she had spent a decade building around herself. Or she could do the thing she had not done once since her father died. She could listen to someone who was not supposed to have the answer. She opened the door herself before he could come around. "Same time tomorrow, Mr. Cole," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he answered. She walked into the building without looking back, and by the time the elevator doors closed around her, she had already opened the Halbert file on her phone and was scrolling toward page 17. That night, before she left the office, she called the transport agency herself. The regular driver's leave had been extended indefinitely. His brother had been moved to intensive care. She told the agency she would keep Ethan Cole on as her exclusive temporary driver until further notice. The agency did not ask why. Nobody ever asked why when Scarlett Vaughn made a decision. That same night, Scarlett stayed in the office until 2 in the morning and tore the Halbert file apart page by page. Every weakness Ethan had named was there buried in the footnotes where nobody had bothered to dig. The revenue recognition schedule was leaning on an unsigned letter of intent. The pension liability had been quietly capped in the summary, but uncapped in the full schedule. The Brazilian hedge was referenced against the wrong currency index exactly as he had said. By the time she turned off the last lamp, she had a list of 11 problems in a deal her entire team had cleared. She did not call Marcus Renner in the morning. She called Ethan instead and told him she wanted to leave at 7. In the car between a red light on Park and the exit to the FDR, she handed him a folder that did not have a cover page. It was the prospectus for a biotech firm her fund had been circling for 2 months. She had removed the company name, the sector header, and every figure above $20 million. She told him to read what he could in traffic and tell her what he saw. He read in silence for 18 blocks. When he spoke, he did not tell her what the company was. He told her what the company was pretending to be. The cost structure was too clean. The research pipeline showed 3 trials in parallel, but only one principal investigator. The cash burn was being smoothed by a related party loan that was footnoted, but not integrated into the projections. Whoever was pitching this deal was selling her a story, not a business. Scarlett took the folder back without looking at him. By the end of the 2nd week, she had given him 4 more files. By the end of the 3rd, she had stopped pretending the tests were a game. She was asking his opinion before the meetings, and more than once, she had walked into a conference room and rewritten a strategy her own analysts had spent a month preparing. Her instincts had always been sharp. Now they had a second blade beside them, and the blade did not flinch. Marcus Renner noticed first. He came into her office on a Thursday afternoon with a tablet under his arm and a question on his face, and he asked her not quite casually where she was getting her counter-analyses. She told him she was doing her own work. He did not believe her, but he did not push. 2 days later, Harold Price, who had sat on her board for 9 years and had voted her into the chair himself, called her on his private line. Some of the partners, he said, were concerned about the direction she was steering in. He used the word concerned twice. One of the partners in particular, he added, was asking hard questions. Daniel Atchison. Scarlett thanked him for the concern and ended the call. She knew the name. Daniel Atchison had sat on her board for 4 years and had never once voted against an acquisition. He was the kind of man who agreed with everything and was remembered for nothing, which was, she understood only later, the most expensive kind of board member to keep. She made a note of the name and moved on. The Halberd vote was scheduled for a Monday. On the Friday before, she took the 7 o'clock car with Ethan and told him she was going to kill the deal. She had found the 11 problems. She had built the counter memo. Her board had already signed off on the acquisition and expected her to close it at the Monday session. If she pulled it, she would be burning 6 months of political capital and contradicting every advisor in the firm. She wanted to hear him tell her she was right. He did not tell her she was right. He told her the question was the wrong one. She could kill the deal, and she would be correct on paper, and she would lose the board anyway, because the board would hear a CEO who could not close. The deal was not the problem. The structure was. If she restructured, Halberd rewrote the offer to account for the pension and the hedge and the earnout, and went into the room with a revised term sheet instead of a no. She would take the same 11 problems and make them her leverage. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at her in the mirror once. He drove. She spent the entire weekend in the office. Marcus Renner came in on Saturday at her request and spent 6 hours arguing with her before he understood what she was doing. By the end of that Saturday, something in him had shifted. He stopped arguing and started building with her. By Sunday night, the revised term sheet was drafted, the pension liability was carved out, the Brazilian exposure was hedged correctly, and the earnout was retooled against margin. On Monday morning, she walked into the boardroom at 8:55, set the new terms on the table, and told them she was not closing the deal they had approved. She was closing a different one. The room went still. Harold Price asked her to explain herself, and she explained for 40 minutes. Daniel Atchison, sitting 3 seats to her left, asked 3 questions during her presentation, all of them angling toward whether the new terms were really hers, or whether someone outside the firm had drafted them. She answered each question without looking at him. By the end of it, the deal was voted through at a price $19 million lower than the original, with protections her original analysts had never modeled. Halberd's counterparty accepted the revised terms within 48 hours because the alternative was watching the acquisition collapse. 2 weeks later, the hidden pension liability hit the financial press, and every competing bidder who had been circling Halbert quietly pulled out. Scarlett had bought a clean asset for less money, and the market had not caught up yet. She should have felt victorious. Instead, when she got into the car that evening, she sat in the back seat for a full minute without speaking, and then she told Ethan that her board had started asking questions about him. He received the information the way he received everything without reaction, and asked her what she had told them. She told him she had told them nothing, that he said was probably wise. He drove her home and did not speak again for the rest of the ride. The questions did not stop. Harold Price took her to lunch on a Wednesday and asked in the middle of the dessert course whether she had begun consulting outside the firm. She told him she had not. He smiled the smile of a man who had already checked. A week after that, her assistant came into her office and said that someone from the compliance team had requested a copy of the driver roster, which had never happened once in the 4 years she had run the company. The request had been flagged as originating from a board member's office. Daniel Atchison's name was on the requisition. Scarlett approved the release and sat in her chair for an hour afterward without moving. The doubt arrived slowly the way good doubt always does. It did not come from anything Ethan had said or done. It came from the math. Nobody read a biotech prospectus the way he had read the one she handed him in the car. Nobody walked a CEO through a pension carve-out in 4 sentences unless they had done it before. Nobody drove for a living who could price a Brazilian currency hedge off the top of his head while watching the road. She had been telling herself for a month that he was simply gifted, self-taught, an unusual man in an unusual job. By the end of the 6th week, she no longer believed it. She did not ask him. She went around him. She called a former associate at a research firm downtown and gave her 3 pieces of information: a first name, a last name, a range of ages. She asked for a background profile on the desk by morning. The associate called her back that night instead. The profile was 4 pages long. Ethan Cole had been 8 years earlier the lead strategist at Meridian Advisory, the firm that had structured more than $60 billion in cross-border acquisitions between 2010 and 2017. He had been 36 years old when he closed the largest private equity deal of that decade. He had been offered a partnership at 3 separate firms in the same month, and then on a Friday in the spring of 2017, he had walked out of Meridian at noon, declined every offer on the table, and vanished from the industry entirely. There was no scandal. There was no investigation. There was a wife he had lost that winter, noted in 1 line without detail. After that, nothing. For 8 years, he had lived on the margins of cities and done work that did not require a name. Scarlett read the profile twice. Then she closed the folder and sat at her desk in the dark for an hour. She was not angry at him for being competent. She was angry at herself for not seeing it. She was angrier at him for letting her believe, even by his silence, that she had discovered something. He had known every morning he opened her door exactly what he was doing. He had been steering her gently, the way a man corrects a horse that does not know it has a bit in its mouth. She had not been the one running the tests. She had been the one being tested. The next morning, she did not take the car. She had her assistant cancel the 7 o'clock and reschedule with a different driver from the same agency. She did not explain. She sat in the back of a different black sedan with a different quiet man behind the wheel and rode to work in a silence that felt nothing like the silence she had grown used to. The Halbert deal was closing that week. A new acquisition was coming across her desk, the largest her firm had ever attempted, and for the first time in 9 weeks she was going to have to read it alone. She was not sure she still knew how. The new acquisition was called Ashford Logistics, and on paper, it was the deal of the decade. $410 million for a distribution network that spanned 11 states with infrastructure that would have taken Vaughn Capital 6 years and twice the capital to build from scratch. Harold Price had brought it to her himself, which should have been the first thing that slowed her down. Daniel Atchison had seconded the introduction. The full board was behind it. Marcus Renner had run the numbers 3 times and declared them clean. The closing window was 11 days. Scarlett read the file on a Wednesday night in her office with the door closed and the phones off. She read it again on Thursday. By Friday morning, she knew something was wrong with it, and she could not say what. The financials were too clean. The due diligence was too complete. Every red flag she had learned to look for was absent, which in her experience was itself a red flag. But when she walked herself through the logic of her objection, she could not find the sentence that named it. She had the instinct. She did not have the words. She almost called him. She picked up her phone twice that Friday and put it down both times. The second time, she sat at her desk for a long while, with her hand resting on the receiver, and thought about what it would mean to ask. She had spent her whole career not asking. She had built a firm on the principle that the person in the chair did not outsource the chair. And for 9 weeks, she had quietly been doing exactly that. And she had told herself it was discernment. And it had not been. It had been dependence. She did not call him. She canceled her weekend and spent Saturday and Sunday in the office with the Ashford file spread across 3 screens. She did not bring Marcus in this time. She did not bring anyone in. She sat alone and tried to do what Ethan had done. Not the conclusions, the motion of thought that arrived at the conclusions. She asked herself what the file was pretending to be. She asked what the story, underneath the numbers, was asking her to believe. She asked who benefited if she said yes without looking harder. By Sunday afternoon, she had found it. The Ashford network was real. The 11-state infrastructure was real. What was not real was the ownership structure of 3 of the largest terminals, which were held through a holding company, whose beneficial owner, when she traced him through 4 layers of shell entities, turned out to be a director on her own board. Not Harold Price, Daniel Atchison, the same man who had questioned her on the Halberd vote, the same man who had requisitioned the driver roster, the man who stood to make approximately $37 million in undisclosed side compensation if the Ashford deal closed at the price his colleagues had approved. She sat with it for an hour. She was not surprised, which surprised her. Somewhere in the last 9 weeks, she had stopped being surprised by the way power arranged itself around its own appetites. What she felt instead was something closer to clarity. She knew exactly what she was going to do. She was going to walk into Monday's board meeting and lay the 4 layers of shell companies on the table in front of Daniel Atchison and let him explain them to the people who had trusted him. She did it. She did it at 8 in the morning on a Monday with the full board in the room, and she did not raise her voice once. She walked through the ownership trace slowly, the way Ethan had walked her through the Halberd pension schedule, not accusing, just describing. By the time she reached the 4th layer, Daniel Atchison had gone the color of wet paper. Harold Price, who had brought her the deal, and who she wasn't yet certain, had known, asked for a recess. She granted it. Atchison resigned before noon. The Ashford deal was pulled. 2 days later, the state attorney general opened a preliminary inquiry. By the end of the week, a financial paper ran a short profile on Scarlett Vaughn that used the word formidable twice and the word ruthless once, and the market responded by pushing her fund's public parent up 11%. Harold Price came into her office on the Friday afternoon and told her with something that was almost warmth that he had been wrong about her. She told him he had not been wrong. He had just been late. Marcus Renner came in after Price left. He stood in her doorway for a long time before he spoke. He told her that whatever she had been reading for the last 9 weeks, he wanted to read it too. He was not asking for credit. He was asking for the method. She told him she would teach him what she could. He nodded once and left. It was the first honest conversation she had ever had with him, and she understood that she had been paying him $2 million a year for 9 years to be dishonest without knowing it. She did not feel triumphant. She went home that night and stood at the window of her apartment and looked at the lights of the city she had navigated alone for years And then not alone for 9 weeks. And now alone again. And she understood finally what Ethan had given her. He had not given her answers. He had given her a way of reading the room. The Ashford trace she had followed through 4 shell companies on Sunday afternoon was not a thing he had taught her in words. It was a thing she had learned by sitting beside him for 9 weeks and watching how his mind moved through a document. She had learned the motion. The motion was hers now. He was waiting outside the tower on Saturday morning. She had not called him. She had not expected him. The black sedan at the curb was not the firm's car. It was a different car, older his own. He was standing beside the driver's door in the same dark suit he had worn the first morning, and when she walked out of the lobby, he did not move toward her. He waited for her to reach him. She stopped 3 feet away. They looked at each other for the first time without the frame of the rearview mirror between them. She asked him how he had known she would be there. He told her he had read the news, and he knew she came into the tower on Saturday mornings when the deals were heavy. She asked him why he had come. He told her he had come to make sure she did not need him. She almost laughed. It came out as a breath instead. "You could have told me," she said. He agreed that he could have. She asked him why he had not. He answered the way he answered everything quietly without apology. He told her that if he had told her who he was in the first week, she would have hired him as a consultant and paid him $400,000 a year, and he would have given her the answers, and she would have used them, and she would have been exactly where she was before he arrived. She would have been buying other people's thinking. He had done that work for 15 years. He had watched dozens of brilliant people pay him to replace their own judgment, and he had taken their money, and at the end of it, he had looked at what he had built and understood that he had not made any of them better. He had only made them dependent. She asked him what had changed. He told her his wife had died. He said the sentence without decoration and without inviting her into it. After that, he said he had not wanted to solve problems for people who could solve them themselves. He had wanted to see if anyone could learn to solve them alone. She had been the first person in 8 years he had wanted to try it with. She asked him why her. He told her he had listened to her take a phone call on the first morning of his employment, and he had heard a woman who was already 3 steps ahead of her own advisors and didn't know it. She had not needed information. She had needed permission to trust the step she had already taken. He had given her that permission in the form of a sentence, and then another, and then another. And he had watched her stop needing the sentences. Ashford, he said, she had done without him. That was the point. She asked him what he was going to do now. He told her he did not know. He said it the way a man says it when not knowing is the answer and not the problem. He was going to drive for a while longer maybe, somewhere warmer. He had not decided. She asked him if he wanted a job at her firm. The question came out before she had permitted herself to ask it, and she already knew the answer before he shook his head. "If I came to work for you," he said, "you would stop trusting yourself again inside of a year. You do not need a strategist. You already are one." She told him that was not fair. He told her it was not meant to be fair. It was meant to be true. They stood on the sidewalk for another moment without speaking. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. She opened it. It was a single page, handwritten 11 lines long. 11 questions. They were the questions he asked himself, he said, before he made any decision that mattered. He had written them out that morning. They were hers now. She folded the page and put it in the pocket of her coat. She asked him if this was goodbye. He told her that he did not think so. He told her he thought she would see him again one way or another, but not as a driver and not as an advisor. Maybe as a friend. Maybe in a room somewhere years from now where neither of them had expected to be. He got into the older car. He did not wave. She did not wave. He drove out of the block and around the corner and was gone. She stood on the sidewalk for a minute after the car disappeared. Then she walked back into the tower and rode the elevator to the 42nd floor and sat in her office with the folded page on the desk in front of her. She read the 11 questions once, then she read them again. She did not try to answer them yet. She wanted to know what it felt like to hold a question and not rush to close it. On Monday morning, she drove herself to work. The traffic on the FDR was the same traffic it had always been, and she read it the way she now read everything from underneath, looking for the story beneath the surface. At a red light on 49th, she took the folded page out of her pocket and read the 11 questions once, and then she folded it again and put it away. By the time she reached the tower, she had answered the first 3 for herself. The rest would come. She parked the car in her own spot and walked into the lobby and rode the elevator up to the 42nd floor alone. And when the doors opened, she understood for the first time in her life that she had not been waiting for permission. She had been waiting to stop needing it.